literally just some sort of particle beam something or other that they used. Unlike just an explosion where you blow things to bits, these weapons just dissolved things and they were gone. Okay, at this point, we're at a point after 6 days where they've been on several travels through historic times and so forth that Ascot explains to Edward and to Jitsi that she feels that they are now both very prepared to go back into the time of Jesus Christ, Immanuel, and that their education at this point now should serve them well, so they will better understand, and it is time for Edward to actually meet Immanuel. At this point on the tapes, I was a little quandary whether or not I should go on with this or not, but what I'm going to do is I'm not going to continue on with the time travel back into the year 32 right here with Edward, because I want to tie that together with the rest of the information about the Talmud of Immanuel, the writings of Immanuel, on 2 separate tapes. And those are in your tape set. So what I'll do here is I'll just kind of tell you a little bit about the general overview and what happened to Jitsi, and then we'll go over it again more in detail, and I'll tell you all about the conversation that young Edward's going to have with Immanuel on the other tape set. Well, they do go back to the year 32. They're there for 4 days. When they get there, you have Ascot, Edward, and Jitsi is still with him. By this time, Jitsi has had a major mind change about life and what is real in creation and what's really historically gone down on our planet. He's seen the truth of things now for quite some time, and a lot of changes have gone on in his head, so he's pretty much ready now to make a trip back to the year 32 also. They make the trip. They're there for 4 days. One of the problems that Billy had was his hair. He had just had a haircut before they had gone on this trip and had short hair, which apparently was very unusual in those times. That most people just let their hair grow all the time, and I suppose they did because they really didn't have barbers, or it was just the style at the time to let your hair grow. And not to mention, many people believe that long hair facilitates personal strength. And I think that was a belief during those time periods. It was probably just an excuse not to get a haircut. But for whatever reason, most people had long hair at the time, and so it was out of place. So Ascot got some robes that had hoods on it, kind of like a monk sort of look, and that's what they wore during the time period. And because the language at the time, Aramaic, they did not understand, they were still using language translators around their belt so they could understand people of the time they were in. They were there for 4 days. I don't know exactly where they sat down, but they wandered around from area to area and wound up close to the Mount of Olives, where Edward does have a conversation with Immanuel. Jitsi's with them all the time, taking all of this in. When they actually get there, Jitsi gets very nervous about the fact that he's actually going to meet Jesus Christ. And this could be a very heavy thing for someone who has worshipped and has had the concept for years that this man, Jesus Christ, is actually the Lord of the universe and the creator of all men and all the other, things that are exaggerated by a Christian religion, when in fact he was just a real man like the rest of us. And now it's turning out that he wasn't even called Jesus Christ, he was really called Immanuel. So when they get there, Jitsi is kind of overcome and he's getting excited again. He's getting a little out of hand. And Ascot and Edward and Jitsi are standing by the road, and Immanuel and his followers are walking towards them. And Jitsi's going a little berserk, he's getting a little excited. He's losing control a little bit. And Edward just pops him once right on the nose, gives him a short chop right in the face. And Jitsi just calms right down, and his nose is bleeding a little bit. And Ascot thought that was the most unusual way to handle human behavior. And it was about that time that Immanuel walks up, who seemed to be expecting the talks, says hello to Ascot. Apparently he had known Ascot and been visited by her several times before, and turns to Jitsi very calmly and suggests that Jitsi go over and sit down with his followers who are sitting down beside the road there, and that they would take care of him. And they do stay there for a while, and Edward has his conversation, which we'll go into in length on the other tape. And then they get back into the ship and they return. Jitsi, other than that, does not speak with Immanuel. Just met him for a moment there, was about it. And they return in the ship and they go back to Jordan, where they never really see Jitsi again. And so Jitsi got an opportunity there just by virtue of being in the right time at the right place. He got to see a lot and go on the travels with him for that entire 6-day time. Okay, we're going to move forward in time on our own here now. We've been talking about Edward's travels with Ascot back in the year 1956. After those travels, he continued on and went into India and roamed around many different countries. He had a few other contacts with Ascot, and there are some old pictures in black and white in India that Billy took of her ship and inside of her ship looking down at the earth. Those pictures aren't too common, they're not too common around, and I generally show them in my slideshow because people really haven't seen them very much.
Sure.
But his contacts after a while with Ascot were mostly telepathic towards the end, and then he didn't see her again for the longest period of time, except of course when he was reunited with her for just a small while he visited the great spacer of the Pleiadians. Well, let's move back up now. We're up to 1975 again, October 20th, and Billy's having his 36th contact that has gone on now since over a 10-month period. So it's been 10 months and he's had 36 contacts, so that you can see they're happening quite regularly here. All in all, there's going to be over 135 of them before they actually stop. Okay, he's now having contacts with Semjase. He's now known as Billy, so I can remember to call him Billy all the time instead of Edward. Beginning in 1975, he started using the name Billy for everything. Okay? At this particular contact, Semjase seems to be a little upset, and because numerous times they've quizzed Billy about his public speaking, and Billy keeps saying he's gonna, and then he says he's not gonna, that he's just not cut out for it and he can't do it, so he's going to get his friend Hans Jacob to do it. And he's been working with Hans apparently to do some public speaking, and Billy writes his speeches out word for word, more or less, so Hans can read them, I suppose, is the general idea. And they've been working on some speeches, and Hans apparently is kind of chickening out and has written a letter back to Billy, and the letter he would like for Billy to take to Semjase and read to her, because it's stating all the reasons that he doesn't want to do the speaking. In particular, most of the reason is to do the speaking. In particular, most of the reason is the fact that he feels that the information is too harsh, that it's going to be too shocking for people to hear many of these things, that it will be very disturbing to them. And he's probably right. You can't just show up somewhere at a meeting and start talking about things and telling people, well, this is what life is, and there isn't any God the way you think of it, and everything you know is wrong. Well, that's not exactly how you approach people. But on Billy's hand, he's telling Hans that the truth can be very harsh, and quite often when people are led astray, that to hear the truth about things can be rather shocking. That's also true. But there are ways to present information so people don't feel challenged and threatened. I mean, after all, just like Ascot says, we're all on our own path of evolution, and even though you hear somebody say something, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to believe it. We're all working on different things at different times, so it's important always when you present information, you present it just as an inspiration, and just for what it really is, it's just words of information. It's not part of anybody's life yet, they haven't experienced it. So people who are open-minded, and remember, be open-minded, it's a sign of intelligence, it's okay to listen to things. Anytime you feel yourself getting too locked into something, too dead set on something, you're probably getting a little closed-minded, and you want to be cautious. You may have run across some absolute truth that you can now keep for now on, and that's good to hang on to. But in many cases, people get very hard-headed about things which are incorrect anyway, and it's very hard to get them loose from it. So I can appreciate Hans's problem, especially in Europe. I've had my own experiences with people in Switzerland and Germany, and a little closed-mindedness here and there, so I can understand what he was up against. Well, anyway, Billy has shown up at the contact with a letter from Hans stating that he doesn't really want to do this, but before he gets a chance to say anything, Semjase is rambling on about how disappointed they are that Billy's not doing any public speaking, that he has jeopardized the mission. They're 10 months into the mission, and he's not moving ahead with this, so they've decided to put Billy on probation, that they're not going to see him for a month. It'll be sometime in November, so he has time to think this over, and that they feel they've been deceived somehow by Billy, because he has said all along that he was going to do public speaking and get the information out to the public, and he's not done this. Well, Billy, of course, he stops her and he calms her down because she seems to be, a little excited. And he calms her down and explains that he has been trying. And here's a letter from Hans explaining what he's doing. And she reads the letter and she's really kind of taken back by it a little bit and surprised that Hans is taking the attitude that he is. Because you got to remember, the Pleiadians, even though they're older than us, have higher technology, that doesn't mean they understand us that well. They don't live in the same kind of morality. They don't have the same kind of problems, especially social problems and social pressures like we do. Hans has got a tough problem here. ETs have come and educated Billy. They have not educated Hans. Billy's just giving all this information, writing a speech out for Hans, and expects Hans to go out like a little robot in front of a crowd and read this stuff off. Well, that'd be a tough job, especially since it's not Hans's truth. Hans hasn't had the benefit of all the experiences that Billy has, so it's not true for him. It's just secondhand information. He may not even believe in a lot of it yet. So far, to him, it may just be information. Well, at any rate, Semjase's upset by the letter. She goes back to the Beamship with Billy, and they get Ptah on the screen there. They're kind of having a conference call of some type. And she reads the letter again to Ptah, and Ptah understands, and he comments he understands Hans's situation, his problem, but he also understands that Hans is, in his letter, apparently kind of twisted things his own way too, and has accused the Pleiadians of doing things that they haven't, and he's accused Billy, and he's calling Billy names and so forth, that he's this and he's that. So Hans has gotten a little excited on his own also. So Ptah just calms everybody down and says, well, that's fine. If Hans doesn't want to do it, we understand. Everybody has to make their own decisions, and he's not particularly upset by it at all. As a matter of fact, he seems to have a very highly evolved, open-minded view towards all people, and understands that people have different problems with different things in life, and that's okay. We all just kind of have to follow our own path. I know for myself, it was a big lesson for me younger in life when I finally dawned on me one day that we do have to give everybody space to be themselves. And when we can start looking at somebody else as just an individual spirit on their own path without any prejudice, and when we quit looking at them materially, when we look at them just as a spirit of nature or a spirit of God, or whatever you want to call it, on their own path, then you can start to appreciate them. You almost find a little humor in looking at someone and seeing what they're doing with their life. But then you don't feel prejudice and anger. I've always kind of been like that, and it was refreshing for me in this material to find that attitude even more reinforced. I don't always find in the contact notes where the Pleiadians are particularly aware of this, even though they say it, but they seem to have pushed a lot of on Billy, telling Billy how important it is that he do things, and leaning on him by telling him, that the world is going to go bad if you don't perform this mission, and the whole world is waiting on you. And there's a lot of pressure on Billy to perform back in these times. So it's not hard to understand why he's had the difficulties that he has in life. Well, anyway, they read the letter of Hans and so forth, and after the Ptah reads the letter and responds to it to Billy, then Billy understands a little bit better, and everybody seems to be a little calmed down, but still, Billy's not getting out in the public, and the information isn't getting out. So far, it's just in his house, and a small group of people that come and read it there are just his friends. And Semjase reiterates that they're trying very hard to get information out, and they really do feel love for the Earth person. They live in a very loving, happy, kind of blissful society, and they really don't understand us that well. They don't have hate, anger, prejudice, and jealousy on their world like we do. They are kind of more like Spock-like Spock in a blissful meditation, just kind of a even-tempered, blissful sort of person, is the impression I get about them. And they have trouble understanding how to relay information and expect reactions from us, the earthworms. And I suppose that our logic and our attitudes sometimes are quite a surprise to them. I think they can't understand why Billy just doesn't go out on the street corner and everybody will listen. Well, as they've been speaking so much about Hans, and they're in the Beamship, Semjase wants to show Billy something kind of unusual. She says, quite often because they have trouble understanding Earth people and people on other worlds when they're studying them. And I do believe that part of the Pleiadian contacts were probably mostly just like an experiment on their end. There was only a handful of the Pleiadians that actually had